What are some things humans could discover quickly if research ethics didn't exist? Story 1. How language itself comes to be. Throw a couple kids together and observe if they develop a spoken language amongst each other. Actually, this has already been done with Nicaraguan singers. Before the 70s, there was no language for the deaf in Nicaragua. In an attempt to bring together deaf children and teach them to lip read, they inadvertently created a situation where these kids came together and made their own language. As generations of kids came through the school, the language became more refined with what seemed to be definitive rules and grammars. Story 2, a series of Lord of the Flies tests. Put a group of adults or kids of different ages and backgrounds into different isolated situations with no rules like the book. If you carefully select the participants, you could easily look at behavior of different demographics and societal interaction from this. Given different situations, one could see the different effects on psychology. For example, put 10 upper class teenagers from America on an island with only one source of food and water. See whether they resort to rationing or one takes complete control of the source and defends it from others. Then put 10 Iraqi lower class teens on an island and see what they do differently. Do they follow a pattern of the other group or do they follow a different path? We could learn so much about different cultures' impacts on behavior, as well as natural human behavior. Story 3. We could cure malaria once and for all. As a malaria researcher, I have no doubt about this at all. But this would involve a total abandonment of both research ethics and basic responsibility to the rest of the organisms on the planet now and in the future. Our inability to do experiments on humans and our reluctance to completely wipe mosquitoes off from the planet by any means necessary are what is keeping us from doing it. For that matter, we could probably manage with what we have if we invaded every single malaria endemic country and controlled their government and public health systems. But that doesn't fly so well either. Story 4. We could learn a lot about nutrition. Right now, nutrition feels like pseudoscience. Any retrospective study depends on self-reporting, and any prospective study could only be an intention to treat study. Also, people seem to accept either the standard American diet or the My Plate diet as standard of care. But sadly, those have been crafted more by businessmen and lobbyists than scientists. If we could actually control the diets of subjects from birth, meaning that they have to eat what is provided for them when it is provided and that they get to make none of their own dietary decisions, we could elucidate the healthiest human diet in a single lifetime. Of course, this would mean depriving people of their ability to make the most basic choices for themselves every day. It would also mean putting a lot of people on diets we suspect are less ideal and not necessarily treating them for complications arising from the diet. Prohibitively unethical, but extremely interesting. Story 5. How the human brain works. Just take all the prisoners, cut out different parts of their brains, and run them all through a standard battery of tests. As it stands, we have to get lucky by finding someone who has a naturally occurring lesion on their brain to test what impairment to specific portions of the brain does. People have been trying to figure out how the brain works by taking the brain of a mouse and slicing it into tiny pieces and looking at them under the microscope. Mouse brains are much more simple than humans, and we still don't have a clue. I find it amazing that the brain is the most complex structure in the known universe, and I have one inside my head. Story 6. I think it would be interesting to raise a child from birth without letting them see color. Let them see gray, black, white, skin, etc., but attempt to shield red. That one's hard. Green, blue, etc. I had a purpose for this information at one point when I had the thought a year or so ago, maybe to see how to explain color. Get them to describe it? I don't know really, just a thought. Some psychologists tried an experiment with their child where they never mentioned the sky is considered blue. They were very careful to avoid any situation where the child might hear that until the child was old enough to articulate information about color. Then they asked her what color the sky was. She was puzzled. To her, it didn't have color. Story 7. Lots of weird stuff here already, but I would consider something more long-term. Like, what would happen if we could stop, well, stupid people from reproducing? If everyone had the option to genetically create the perfect child from their genes, you could have a new generation of children with massively increased intelligence, no birth defects, no mental health issues. It could be akin to the reduction of lead leading to a major drop in crime. No healthcare burdens for lifelong disabilities. New research and ideas within 15 to 20 years. They could solve our entire future. Of course, we, the parents of this generation, could rapidly be left behind, the dumb animals, the last pre-chicken just before the egg. The dumb natural borns could offer nothing to the future of perfect genetically engineered humans. Story 8. Serious question. Why is everything in this thread medical or medical related? What about unethical avenues of research in other fields? Physics, chemistry? What about economics, politics, or law? I think there's definitely some unanswered questions here that could benefit from unethical research. Race and class spring to mind. Philosophy, theology, history, can only God create evil? How would someone respond in the runaway trolley thought experiment? Is abolitionism part of a society's natural evolution, or can it be a part of modern society? What about unethical research in the arts? I've always wondered whether pain is necessary for good art. Surely that can be tested. To what extent is Voltaire's statement, the composition of a tragedy requires testicles? True, what about entire avenues of research that are unethical, like geoengineering, weaponized virology? Heck, weapon research in general. I think you guys are focusing too much on the intentional harm part of unethical research. What about other concerns like privacy? What about the correct credit application? How would research change if anyone could claim anyone's work as their own? What if plagiarism or fabrication of results wasn't unethical? What kinds of things might we discover then? Okay, maybe I was less than serious for a while then, but I still say you guys are too narrow-minded in your lack of ethics. Story 9. Well, let me preface this with the statement that under voluntary and fully transparent conditions, with clearly stated non-racially motivated goals, I believe that eugenics could be a good thing. I mean, animal husbandry is basically just eugenics for herd animals, and it has produced some very robust specimens. Why can't we do the same for people? Tailor our genomes through successive generations of selective breeding to bring out the brightest, the strongest, the toughest, etc. If you did it voluntarily, it might work, but it would have to be a very specific experiment and likely would not have a very large sample size to work with. Now, if you remove the shackles of ethics and create a giant database of genetic profiles across a huge population swath, and then begin mixing sample and control groups along determined pathways in order to highlight or suppress certain genetic traits, combine that with an involuntary sterility and fertilization program model, you could probably do it a whole lot fast and accomplish selective human breeding in a much more efficient way. But it would be horrible and would say nothing of the social, cultural, or psychological backlash such a program would create. You could even run germlines that would attempt to propagate undesirable traits, such as tendencies to cancers or degenerative diseases, if only to be used as lab rats to further study treatments for those diseases. Really, the potentials for massive self-guided genetic experimentation are already inherent in the human genome. We just need a little discipline and sound scientific method to unlock them. Story 10. You could start with making transgenic children, that is, genes from other organisms, or just knocking out genes to see which ones cause diseases or just find out what the hell they do. We could find out what a lot of genes do just by making mutants of them and growing the offspring. This would be quickly in the order of a few years to a decade for any one gene, but you could make strains of humans with different genes knocked out and have a good understanding pretty quickly. Of course, we could also very quickly move up to an enthusiastic trial and error approach to genetically improving ourselves. Just from what I know, you could get people producing all of their own vitamins and amino acids just from stealing the pathways from other organisms. Cellulose digestion from termite microbes. Hemoglobin from something that lives where there is less oxygen. Should be more efficient. Hell, why don't we get started on a fast-track program for human photosynthesis? Try something like what aphids do, or we could start jamming the chloroplasts into zygotes along with the assorted chromosomal genes and see if we need to bother with stomates. Best to try with C4 photosynthesis if possible. Note, I'm a microbiologist most familiar with genetic knockouts in E. coli. Lots of this will be optimistic and very incomplete. Story 11. Actually, there would be a lot of discoveries. I can just imagine off the top of my head 1,000 lesion studies on the brain that could be done, transfections to visualize cells, genetic manipulation for knockout experiments in humans. Actually, this one would be tougher since humans aren't as amenable to genetic techniques as, say, the mouse is. Injecting carcinogenic markers, that is BREU, to study human neurogenesis, injecting voltage-sensitive dyes to study the human visual cortex. Really, anything that could be done in animals, but on humans instead, in Story 12. I don't know about specific end goals, but I'm still shocked that some nation with loose ethics hasn't tried to create a no-holds-barred version of the Olympics, a mega-Olympics, if you will. If there was a competition where all performance-enhancing drugs were allowed, maybe another division with cybernetics, it would have severe negative effects on the athletes over time. Obviously, the human health hazards would be unacceptable in any civilized nation. But the result of such a competition becoming large and popular, and the ad revenue you could get from seeing athletes high jump 20 feet or run a 2-minute mile or play chemically enhanced team sports could spur pharmaceutical R&D similar to the engineering developments that you see in Formula 1 auto racing, which would eventually spill over into all kinds of biomedical advancements. Story 13. We could potentially create a superior breed of humans by reenacting the Hunger Games. Get about 500 to 1,000 people to something over 10 sections, and at a selected age, say 20, a male and a female are randomly chosen from each section every year. They'd host a male and female one so that the last remaining people would mate. After a few generations, we would gradually evolve. Those that spent their 20 years bodybuilding and studying battle tactics and survival tactics would most probably win, and they would pass on these traits to their children, and those children would most likely win the next games if they were chosen. Eventually, we'd have these superior humans in survival and strength. We could study them and find out what parts of them changed over the generations and how that affects their survival, and we could potentially clone them and let them off in the civilized world. Story 14. Just about everything. Spaceflight, travel in general, could all become enormously safer. Medicine would improve. Biology, we'd understand how the brain works, discover if there is a soul, find out if consciousness is a byproduct or something else. Can brains be transplanted? Can we be cloned, etc.? Interestingly, I very much think we would stop researching cures for fatal diseases. The world is horrifically overpopulated. I think the limit is 11 billion humans before we can't actually sustain anymore. If we became a completely unethical society or race, we would stop trying to protect disabled or weaker humans, stop trying to revive the elderly, stop bothering to put early births on weeks of intensive care. But most of all, we would just stop researching cures for malaria and other big killers. They are the biggest human population controllers. And if we weren't too caught up in the idea of the value of human life, we wouldn't be trying to prevent people ever dying. We wouldn't bother with family planning, though, thanks to massively increased death rates from testing. Story 15, MD or PhD student here. Pick pretty much any disease or medical issue out there, and you would see a highly accelerated rate of progress in finding an effective cure or treatment. Basically, you could try the craziest experiments out there, injecting bleach or chemical X or milk or monkey blood into tumors without repercussions. This would certainly lead to faster advances in any area. Psychiatric disorders and their treatments. This area of medicine is truly a pseudoscience in which drugs are thrown at patients without knowledge of why they work and sketchy efficacy. Surgical techniques. The amount of paperwork and red tape involved with human research in this field is unbelievable. Everything about surgery would probably change very quickly. If there were no red and tape example, what drugs to give in conjunction with certain surgeries, what technique is best for a certain problem, if surgery is a more viable option than medicine. New technique development at Story 16. Robotics in general, I know that it is not currently an issue, but no one in the field takes it seriously enough to make the robots have complex functionalists and be actually useful in society, instead of being able to do one job. Robots and AI are being built to deliver specific tasks. If engineers dare to think of a robot that actually replaces humans, we can have in no time robots that do surgery, robotic transportation, farming. As a robotics engineering student, I hope I can help make robots that are useful to society. If that means replacing human jobs, there are some guidelines. Robots, when they replace human jobs, perform mundane, repetitive, dangerous, or precision tasks. You could argue that we are taking away jobs, but the jobs we are taking away are low-wage, low-skill jobs, and we are creating high-skill, higher-wage jobs for technicians and operators. I'm not saying this is completely morally right. Some people are better suited for and/or rely on low-skill jobs. Robots are intended to improve people's lives. I think where morality comes in for most people is when the robots will take over, AI, robot. The robots will not take over. Do you really think we would be so dumb as to not code a kill switch or realize when things are going too far and shut it down? We will make sure the robots will never be able to alter some parts of their code. Story 17, Space Exploration Beyond the Moon. I think one of the many issues behind just launching humans into space for the sake of finding other things about the vastness in which we float around in. It is the fact of the gray area morale of if we do that, then they'll die scenario that humanity hesitates over. If we didn't feel the gray area of this, I feel like much more would be done on the front of space travel and just launching an insane amount of humans into space in every direction. While, yes, money is, of course, an issue, I see it as just as much of an issue that humans feel too much about humanity and its exploration into the great beyond, because no one person or agency wants to somewhat condemn a crew of humans to their certain deaths. If there was an ability for humans to not care about whether life or death was meaningful, I feel like we would accomplish many disturbing yet society enhancing discoveries. By the way, if they ever asked for normal humans to be launched into space for their ultimate, yet possibly death in the next to 70 years of traveling through space, sign me up. I'm all for it. I meant to travel among the stars and hope I get the chance before I die. Story 18, Experiments in Brain Functionality on Living Humans. Much of our modern medicine knowledge is only possible thanks to detailed knowledge of human anatomy. But previously, it was extremely taboo to violate human corpses in that manner. Who knows what we'll be able to achieve in medicine or even artificial intelligence and cognitive inspired computing if we had a complete understanding of the brain and the human nervous system. That said, as a counterpoint, that would open up a sketchy door to things like intrusive procedures. If we can visualize a person's thoughts because we understand everything, then that could potentially lead to a rather scary future. Story 19. What interests me about MKUltra is how long it went on for. Various military and government agencies investigated all kinds of bonkers crap post-World War II, including remote viewing, psychic ability, UFOs, ghosts, telekinesis. The list really does go on and on. Almost without fail, the committees and organizations convened to investigate these proposed phenomena were short-lived and closed up shop with little, if any, practical information to show for it. MKUltra went on for 2 decades, longer if you believe the tinfoil set. That tells me, at a bare minimum, they found enough proof of concept to say, yeah, there's something here that might yield usable technology. I've read the majority of the publicly available MKUltra files out there over the years. Much of it is heavily redacted. Much of what is not is monstrous, which makes me wonder, if they were willing to disclose some of the god-awful crap they did to people, what the holy hell is behind all that black ink? Story 20, the human orangutan thing. It is super bad, and the few attempts have been fortunately stopped by luck, where it would have otherwise been successful. Once in Russia, the subject had brain hemorrhage. And in China, I believe, civil unrest and problems with the government resulted in the subject being abandoned and died. But I would create crossbred slaves, get a bunch of people, get to the moon, build a mining station towards the poles, in the craters, build helium-3 mines. I shall experiment with nuclear energy and low-gravity environments, shall use human subjects and crossbreds to see what monstrosities I can create. Like the island of Dr. Moreau, but in space. Also, I don't know what I would do with helium-3, given I have nuclear energy here, hopefully. Keep some for power, then sell it to Earth nations? Could be a good incentive for the nations to reach space. Story 21. I would buy lots of islands and set them up. Basic things to survive and build a place. Then picked up different groups to each. One island for omnivores, one for vegans, one for feminists, one for guys from the other end, one for social justice warriors and other kinds, one for rad leftist and one for rad right, one for essential oil believers, and then just let them build their bases up and survive and try to get this working system. Every group would have equal start with materials, guides, and books to learn all they need. No outside contact. Unless, in time of sickness that needs medical attention, except in the essential oil group. I would just watch how those different groups would work, and not mixing in race or religion. Story 22. Like to see if we could drastically slow slash and burn agriculture by setting all of the farmers in that part of the world with the efficiency tools of agricultural technology, including crops that were bioengineered finely to the needs of the population, so that they could use less land and labor to yield more food. Wipe out select mosquito species that carry malaria, Zika, West Nile, extra. Replace with a harmless mosquito species only if direly necessary to the food chain. Experiment with geoengineering to try to affect global cooling, preferably by carbon absorption. Fertilize patches of ocean with iron. Spray aluminum oxide aerosols in the sky. Run nuclear-powered or biological carbon capture plants. Work on the same for methane, etc. See what works. Bioluminescent trees at night. Create haunted forests, line city streets, and a few jogging pathways through parks. Build some of the newer nuclear plant designs. Story 23. I have this theory that bacteria with a specific genetic modification would, if injected into someone, allow them to be frozen cryogenically and then safely unfrozen later. I intend to do this in real life if I can, though, because I would never freeze a human if I was not rather sure the technology was safe, and would start with myself as the first test in any case, so the money is not an issue part is the one that I would be most excited about. I think you're referring to bacteria that can survive freezing or thawing conditions because they produce ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Since the bacteria's metabolism is completely different from a human's, the bacteria survives no problem, but having that antifreeze in human cells would be poisonous. Story 24. I'd perform numerous experiments and try to make a machine that can diagnose someone with any medical issue. I know the robots are taking over, but this could be better than doctors, seriously. For example, some doctors are biased towards people or ignore serious issues because it's unlikely. There's so many stories of children with brain injuries that get diagnosed with anger issues, learning disabilities, and ADHD, and women who have issues down there that have to go through so many doctors to get someone who takes them seriously. So, this machine I would build would be able to do a full medical scan by just sitting you in a chair, scanning you, and maybe having you do a few surveys and would diagnose the issues you have. No blood tests, no sim-down doctors to go through. It would probably take just an hour or two. This would be used to diagnose literally anything: cancer, mental health issues, osteoporosis, epilepsy, cavities, you think of it, and this machine would do it. I thought of this because I have a needle phobia and hate seeing doctors. I know this machine would probably take extremely long to ever happen in real life. Don't even know if it's possible. And it wouldn't have these specific details IRL, but I thought it was cool and I love the idea.